Good evening, everyone, and thank y'all so much for joining us, and welcome to the University of Florida IFAS Winter Supplementation Seminar. I'm going to have everyone muted for this time period, but at the end of the question and answer session with the panel, I will open up the opportunity for you to ask questions, but also feel free to use the chat feature and put your questions in there so that we can get those to the panelists ahead of time. And now we're going to introduce each panelist. I'll start with Alex Johns from the Seminole Tribe.
Alex Johns, Seminole Tribe, ranching in Glades in Hendry County. Got a co-op of about 60 plus members that have different supplementation programs. So all of them are using molasses on a year-round basis.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Matt Pearce, Pearce Cattle Company. We ranch in Perry, Georgia, and Okeechobee, and then down south in Clewiston, Florida. We're like Alex. We use the molasses product year-round and bridge the gap on the supplementation program.
I'm Alan Smith, Southern Accent Farm in Okeechobee. We're purebred Brangus breeders, and over the years we have come to using the molasses 12 months out of the year. We don't just use it in the fall and winter. We use it year-round.
Okay, I'm Chris Prevatt. I'll be your moderator tonight. I'm a beef cattle and forage economist located at the Range Cattle REC in Ona, Florida. All right, so to start tonight's seminar, our first question is going to be, and Alex, we'll start with you. So how is molasses stored on your ranch, and how is it being delivered to the pastures?
Okay. We basically, because it's a co-op atmosphere, we store in bulk tanks. It's delivered in semi-loads, and then we have a nurse truck that puts the product out. So basically, our cooperators will call, order a delivery, whether it's one tub or 10 tubs, and we will distribute for them. In years past, whenever we didn't have a year-round program established at the tribe, several of us had our own tanks. And like I still got my own tank and I've got my own wagon. So I'd pull out with a tractor in a little 500-gallon wagon. So it's as simple as pulling a 500, 250-gallon wagon to as complex as having a tanker truck deliver it to us. So we kind of use all the above.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so my storage is in 2,500-gallon cone bottom poly tanks, and we can move those around. We run a lot of lease land, so you may be there this year, you may not be there in 5 years. So it's not as permanent. On our pastures that we own, we have steel tanks that we, or 4,000-gallon steel tanks, and then we can put different products in them. That's the benefit of the 2,500-gallon tanks. We have 2 or 3 of those set there where we can use different products. As far as the equipment, since we're scattered out, we've got a couple of 1,000-gallon molasses wagons that are, they have a roper pump on them and a gas motor, so we deliver it that way. And some of our smaller pastures that we don't get to, we'll have our local dealer deliver that, and that works out good. So we pull the wagon either with a tractor or a truck, depending on what time of year. Now we're pulling with a tractor.
We store ours in, we have 2 2,500-gallon tanks, so we buy a semi-load at a time. One thing different from us, we put a pump on our little wagon that we use. It holds 1,000 gallons, but it's a hydraulic pump that runs off hydraulics on the tractor. So that keeps us from having another gasoline engine that we have to maintain. So that's worked out really good for us with one of those little banjo pumps that plug right into the hydraulics on the tractor.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So we got a lot of different ways we can get that delivered to our cattle. So for each of you, which months are you using liquid molasses and why? So I guess this goes a little bit into maybe some of the breeding season. So what months are you using it?
Well, we're using molasses year-round. It's the carrier for our mineral program. It's also our fly control, and then we do something a little extra. We put some mycotoxin binders through our product. So we recommend it year-round, but I've got cooperators that have their own program, some that don't do anything, some that do seasonal feeding, most do year-round feeding. We keep track of all the data behind it and what the production numbers and the economics look like. And then we share that with our producers every year so they can justify the ROI. If you're willing to go with a year-round program, this is the cost and this is the results that we anticipate you will see by doing that. It seems to me that the year-round program and our operation works the best. It's probably not the most economical for people. It's a hard pill to swallow when they figure out how much it costs to actually feed year-round a cow-calf. But when they look at long-term, the production rates that improve long-term, and then it really shines, the year-round program really shines during droughts or floods. That is when those programs shine. That's when you will see the benefit, when the seasonal folks will not.
You have those extremes.
Yes,
Yeah.
when you have those extremes, the year-round program will shine.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. We feed it year round in Florida, and then in Georgia we'll feed it on a seasonal basis. But we've got different forages to where we're calving in the spring, and then we're planting winter grazing. So it's a little different up there. But down here, Alex is right. It's a supplement. So we're bridging the nutritional gaps between when it's dry in the spring. And typically you're not, on the season, you're not putting out molasses, but cattle need that. And then, most people don't think about putting out molasses in June, July, August, and September. But, and then you think about, well, how wet it is and how poor the forage quality is. That's really when you need it more. It is in those nutritional gaps when you're trying to bridge that gap. So we've seen it too during the really stressful times, to where you bridge that gap and you see the benefits. I've got the numbers on year round, and the one thing to wrap your mind around is when we first approached this, to go from a 150-day season, you're almost 2.5 times as much. So you think you're going to have 2.5 times as much intake, and actually you don't, because you flatten the bell curve. And so on a typical season, our cattle were eating about 560 pounds of molasses in a 150-day season. And we went to year round, and they backed up to 1.2 pounds a day. So that equates to about 470 pounds. So you think about it, well, you're feeding them year round and they're eating less. That just doesn't make sense. You have to wrap your mind around that, but you have to do it. So you have to, start during your season and then just not stop. You keep feeding it year round. But on that, to add to some numbers, on our steers that first year, and this was in 2002, our steers weighed 57 pounds heavier that next year from a year-round program, and the heifers weighed 24 pounds. And we had about a 5 percentage point increase in conception rate. Now, you can't do that every year. You'll reach a plateau. But that more than paid for the supplementation program. So year-round really works for us.
Can I follow up on what Matt just said?
Mm-hmm.
And I agree 100%. What I've noticed on seasonal, folks that feed seasonal, is consumptions will sometimes be very high, because the cattle, it's just it's psychological. I mean, it's not there year round. All of a sudden they see it and they're running to the bunk, drinking all they can. And then when the person's measuring it over 30 days, they'll call me back and say, oh, you're wrong on consumption, they're over consuming. But that's because the cow has learned it's not always there. But when it's there year round, you will see those consumption levels, flatten out. And over time, it seems like they decrease.
Yeah, and what we've seen is, the longer you wait, maybe you wait till the first frost, or you wait till November or so, those cattle are actually deficient, coming out of, or going into calving, coming out of the wet months. So they overconsume and just to meet their nutrition requirements. So poor quality forage in the fall and wet forage in the summer.
We saw the same thing. Once we went to year round, the consumption leveled off, and our conception rates really picked up. I mean, really picked up. So exactly what these two guys said to start.
Absolutely. Nutrition has a huge function there. So on this liquid molasses that we're supplementing with, what formulation are you using, and does that formulation change throughout the year?
Yeah, so on our typical ranch, everything's based off of year-round forage sampling. as well as we do live liver biopsy sampling in our cattle, just to find out what we're deficient in. And we're deficient, like most people know in this area, in zinc, copper, manganese, selenium. At the tribe, we feed 100% organic selenium. And when we test those cattle on a year-round program, everything is adequate, in their liver biopsies. So we will change our feeding strategy. Now, if I use Purina, I use Purina and Westway, but if I use Purina, I use pretty much the same product year-round, and it works the same. It's a lot less thinking on my part. If I have to use the Westway product, I have to actually pay attention to the season and what's going on with the forage. But they help you do that as well. They will recommend when to change and all, but you can get a spring where you don't have the spring flush as early as normal, and we'll keep them on a 24% with 5% fat a little longer than we typically would. Then we'll move into a 32% protein going into early summer. Once the dog days of summer hit, we'll go to a straight 7% liquid mineral. And then breeding season, we'll go back to a 24%. And then maybe a 24% with fat when we get closer to actually putting the bulls out. And we'll leave that on those cattle until bulls are pulled up. But, it's a lot of it's economics, so we're really having to watch the forage, having to be a farmer, having to watch what's going on with the environment. And if we have a wet winter or if we have a dry summer, sometimes we have to jump back and put a little more fat protein back into those products. So you have to pay attention. And some of those products are pretty pricey, so you don't want to overfeed it as well.
Yeah, Alex is right. You have to manage it. And liquid molasses has come a long way in say, the last 20, 25 years. And in the formulations, 20 years ago, there were probably 5 products, between all the manufacturers, it was formulations. Nowadays, we use the Purina products, and we have a 5% fat, a 10% fat, and a 12% fat product, and that's just all technology, and that added fat or that added energy equates in production. So to answer your question, our formulations, we'll feed our cows a 28% protein and 12% fat. And that 12 units of fat really shows up in the calf weights, and in the conception rates. Standard we used to be either no fat or 5% fat, but when you almost triple the energy, and that's what most cattle are deficient. We can get enough protein in them through the grass. We're pretty fortunate, but we're always deficient energy. So when you increase to a 12% energy, that just runs your production numbers out. So the higher fat is key. On our heifers, we'll back up the protein to 24% protein and 10% fat, and that's the first calf heifers, to lower the protein so we can get more intake. So from what we've seen, the higher the protein, the less the intake. So that helps you manage your economics part of it. And like Alex said, on the Purina products, I pretty much stick with one product straight through. You could do a 24 in the spring and a 32 in the fall. With my storage and us putting it out, it just makes sense to stick with a product that's kind of in between. So that's kind of that. But we feed the bulls a 32-12, to get more protein in them and the increased energy. So,
Matt, there may be isn't there some limitations on fat content with IGR also?
Yes. Yeah.
So to get the IGR, we went with a 32% with 5% fat. So that IGR is a big thing for us with all the fly problems, we have in the woods and the cattle are. So we went with 32% with 5% fat. We can keep our fly control going at the same time.
And there's fly control in y'all's the products you're using as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Matt just hit on this next one just a little bit. What do you figure on your consumption rate per head? I know it may change with the product you're using or season. Is there anything that you kind of plan for consumption rate wise?
Well, we've got historical data that shows the consumption levels plus the science behind the product. They're all limited, with a salt or pH limited products. So the consumption is usually pretty consistent. Us using 4 different rations on one ranch, it can vary from 1.5 pounds a day to 4.5 pounds a day. It's just for what product we're using. And there's times where I encourage, more consumption because there's less quality of grass or less forage available, things like that. So I can't give you a specific number, but
gets us in the ballpark range.
But every dealer will have that information, and they'll be able to provide you, all right, this is what the expected consumption should be.
Yeah, and just to follow up with Alex, he's right as far as sometimes what we want to do is increase consumption to increase performance on the animal. So like I go back to saying that the higher the protein, the less the intake. And so like on yearling cattle, I haven't gotten a very good response feeding molasses just because they don't utilize it as well. But we would feed them 16% if you're not expecting a whole lot of performance out of them. But then again, like on bulls, when we pull our bulls up, they go straight to molasses, a 32, 12. And I've got some numbers and I don't mind sharing it. You can feed those bulls for 6 months for about $250 as opposed to a dry feed where it's going to cost you about $350. But you're feeding the dry feed a lot shorter period. My numbers say 90-day dry period versus a 6-month liquid period. But you'll want the intake on that liquid to be about 6, 7, maybe 8 pounds a day. So your formulation is based on your intake. On our cows, and Alan and I shared some numbers earlier. We're basing that, and they don't run out, so we're feeding them to keep the lick wheels full. It's not 2 times a week or 1 time a week. They're full, so you may fill them up every 2 weeks. During the summer you may fill them up every month. But those cattle during the peak of the season, during a 150-day season, are eating 3 to 4 pounds a day. But like I said, on a year-round basis, we're at 1.2 pounds a day. And you kind of set your watch on that, and that's 438 pounds a day, about $80 a head a year, and you can get that back in your production. As far as bulls, like I say, we're basing on 6 to 8 pounds, and then on our first calf heifers, we're wanting 3.5 to 4 pounds, and that's all a calculation to where you meet, a 1 pound of protein intake, and then the grass is 1 pound of protein to get 2 pounds on a cow-calf pair. And that's the biggest thing that I see is grazing distribution. We're not feeding our cows molasses. We're supplementing our cows molasses, and we're feeding them grass. We want them out hustling grass and then supplementing on the molasses. So the way we place our tanks in the pasture, we can, move grazing distribution around. We don't put them all next to the watered hole or, on the side of a road where they can go lay down. So that's kind of the consumption that I've seen on our cattle and the data that we've got.
And our forage quality down here is not very good.
Right.
I mean, we got
5, 6, maybe 8% protein.
Yeah, at the best. At the best. So
on the economic side of it, on cost per cow, a lot of that, it'll fluctuate from $80 to $120 per animal unit. But the $80 person could have a stocking density of 4 acres to a cow. The folks that are stocking heavy, like we have some folks that stock 1.5 acres improved pasture per cow, and those folks will get up to that $120, $130 range. But they analyze the economics of it, and it's justified because they're getting more production at the end of the day off of less acreage per cow.
Absolutely. So you already moved us into that next question. And you may have already answered this part, but the second part of the question, I think you can continue for us. So to all 3 panelists, do you feel it's economically feasible? Obviously, you've implemented this for some time. And how, is there other protein supplementations that you've compared, liquid supplementation to? I think Matt just talked about some dry feed supplements. For the most part, what we're doing here in Central and South Florida is extremely different than what we're doing throughout most of the U.S. in terms of feeding beef cattle. So would you talk just a little bit about the feasibility and the comparison to other protein supplements?
Well, as a comparison, we've utilized some molasses blocks, dry tubs.
Mm-hmm.
And they work well in some areas where we just can't get a wagon, and we do utilize them. But the ROI is less because the cost of buying the tubs is just, and our location has a lot to do with it. We're close to the mill, so the freight is a lot less for us.
For us, those tubs, they tend to, once they get real low, those cattle rolling around, we had some waste on the tubs, so that's why
Yes, sir.
we went away from the tubs and went with the liquid. But we were able to get to all our places.
Yes, sir. And the primary reason we started with liquid was dry mineral consumption. We had trouble getting consumption, and until we started putting our mineral through the liquid, we couldn't get adequate consumption on a year-round basis. And our mineral program was running about $47 a head per year alone, dry mineral, and that's for 365 days. But now that cost is included in our liquid. So, it's just a way to distribute our mineral, our fly control, and our mycotoxin binders. I really don't have anything to compare it to other than dry feed, which we do that seasonally with bulls and some of our heifers, but as Matt told you, some of those numbers, they get pretty high pretty fast. Both programs work, but if you can maintain a liquid program for an extended period of time, it seems like you keep the cattle in good condition year round versus having to, splurge feed them just to get them back into shape.
Yeah, the biggest thing, I think it is definitely economically feasible to feed liquid. Like Alex said, we're close to the byproduct, and we fortify it and add other things to it that make it attractive. I've compared it to, say, a cube program. A lot of guys out west feed cubes. A lot of guys still here feed cubes, but at 60 cents a head a day, at a 3.5 to 4 pound intake, what people don't figure is the labor. And you got to feed it every other day or every day to make it feasible. So my calculations, and this has been true for years, is it's about 25 cents per head per day in labor. So that comes out to, if you're on a cube program at 3.5 to 4 pounds a day, at $130 for a season, where you can feed liquid for a whole year for in the 90s to 100, like Alex said. And then a lot of people don't have that labor. They may have a job in town, or they may have a cow crew, but they don't have somebody to go put out that cubes every 3 days. The thing about molasses and the benefit of it is, like I said earlier, you can feed it, every week. You can feed it every 2 weeks, or if you've got enough troughs or tanks, you can feed it every 3 weeks. So it takes out that everyday labor, and the cattle feed themselves.
Yeah. We only run we've got enough tanks for it. About once every 3 weeks, we go fill tanks. Yeah. And takes a lot of the labor cost out of it.
Same with our operation. Yeah. We'd have 36,000 acres to cover, and a full-time crew couldn't get dry mineral out and maintain boxes, where you can get one guy on a nurse truck and he can maintain everybody's mineral program and supplement program.
Yeah. The other thing is we lease a lot of property, and the thing with the lease is it's all like Alex said, it's ROI. You've got to pay for that land that you're using. You don't take for granted that you own it. So we have to stock it according, and if we supplement year round, we can run a few more cows and make it more productive. But we've also got to be pushing on the other end of the envelope to get as many cows bred and as many pounds across the scales, and that's been successful on the lease operations.
When we run the economics, people that don't feed versus those that feed year round, the ROI was for every dollar spent, you was making $1.50. So that's when you put your breed back numbers in and your increase in wean weights and conception rates.
Absolutely.
I've got those numbers from a trial that we did 20 years ago, and it still stands true today. There was 2 herds together on the same ranch, and they both were 100 head. And they palpated the one group that they didn't feed in the morning, and they were 68% conception rate, but they had no input in a molasses product. And then the herd they did after lunch, they had a molasses, they had a seasonal program that I think was 120 days. So they had $54 input in the molasses. The same fertilization program, the same mineral program, the cattle were treated the same vaccination program. Those cattle tested at 88%. So you got 20 units of increase because you're bridging that gap in the supplement. So like Alex said, I don't know if this is the same numbers, but to run the numbers on that during that time frame, those cows with the extra conception rate, that herd returned $77 per head on a supplement program. That was over feed cost. I did the numbers, and you could go, most people say, well, I can't afford to feed molasses, but I could put together a program that shows you where you could go get a line of credit, borrow the money to feed, and pay it back with $77 a head. You take the interest off that, you're still making $70 a head.
Give it to me.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And something else there
Yeah.
that, and I'm not sure if you agree or not, but what I've noticed is seasonal feeders. So if you have a molasses budget, you're spending about 70% of your year-round budget just on seasonal feeding. So why not spend that extra 30% and have it year-round? So,
and spread your cost out
Yes.
over the year rather than, that's true.
Just to follow up on it, just from a economic standpoint, key factors that each of you mentioned on was getting product to animals out there in the pastures. That's where I would say Central and South Florida is completely different from everywhere else, where you talk about your leased land, and Alex, I've been to your place many times. It's very difficult to get to some pastures to be able to access to those animals where feeding systems that utilize a lot of cotton byproducts and corn byproducts, it'll be a lot more difficult to implement those systems. And that, having the product located here obviously makes it a lot more feasible for us to utilize it. Again, the people in Louisiana have a very similar situation as well. The other thing on cost of other supplements that we typically think about is got to be that there's so right now I'm dealing with a lot of calls from people in the panhandle that commodity barn, it's got water in it 6 inches high. So I mean, there's a lot of waste in some situations where we deal with a lot of hurricanes, and not only can it just destroy the barn, but it's going to destroy potentially truckloads of feed. So there's a lot of other costs. It's not just labor. Labor is a huge one there, but there's also the machine equipment to get it out there. There's waste in every single thing. Whenever we think about byproduct supplements, just thinking about cottonseed meal, how it can easily blow away DDGs. There can be a lot of waste in terms of just getting it moved to your farm and then transferred into the commodity barn. So there's a lot of waste there. If we talk about 1.2 pounds per head per day, it's nothing in terms of cost. I would say, we could be easily up there at 40 to 50 cents per head per day without a problem. I'm fine with us approaching $175, $200 a head. If that's our supplementation program, we can be that high. If we can, even just maintain, this is just in terms of economics, this is the low of the cattle cycle we're in right now from 2019 to 2021. So, we maintain price levels where we are today, then, I'm fine having that cost structure in terms of a supplementation, especially year round. So that's kind of some of the economic thoughts on this. So in terms of troughs, are the troughs you're utilizing, do they have lids, no lids? And just to add a little bit to that question, in terms of waste, what do you feel like you have any waste? Or are there any scenarios where you see other animals getting into your product? Just any thoughts on that as well?
As far as waste goes, I mean, there is a little waste, when a cow's slinging her head and you get a leaky tub from time to time, and you'll get a bear that'll rip the wheels out of one, or hogs that'll jump in and waller it out. But as far as, I don't think it's significant enough to measure, in our operation. We've used wheels, but we've went to open top tubs, and it's just a simple reason as it gives more cattle more access. Now, I've noticed, and I've had complaints of calves getting knocked in the tubs, and typically I find over the years when that happens, it's because of seasonal feeding. The cattle congregate around the tub in a hurry, and the newborns are there, and lo and behold, one gets knocked in there. When you go to a year-round feeding scenario, rarely do you ever find one in the tub. It's because they all come up there whenever they want to. They don't congregate as much. But when you're seasonal feeding, open top tubs would be a concern because you can get calves knocked into the tub. But we feed, to answer your question, we feed open top tubs.
Okay.
We use liquid feeders, the 4-wheel liquid feeders, and it goes back to what I said for the grazing distribution. So you can position them in the pastures, and it's also an intake modifier with the Purina product. So they have to lick the wheel, they have to put a little effort into it. So they're going to get what they want, and then they're going to go out and graze. And the research that I've seen from Purina and what we've done over time is that if you keep the pH in the rumen right, then you're going to get more productivity, more utilization of the forage. So as they're out grazing and they come by a tank, they're going to lick a little bit, and then they're going to go graze, and they're going to lick. So they're snack eating. That's part of the intake modification as well. So it's pH and grazing distribution and the lick wheel. For open troughs, it has a place, like Alex says, if you want to increase intake. So like on the heifers that I referenced before, the yearling heifers that we fed, that we tried to breed, we fed them in open trough. And then if you've ever tried to get a heifer out of a 1,000-gallon trough that's half full of molasses, I mean, that's pretty good. I didn't send you the picture of the bear that was at the lick wheel feeder, but that would be a little bit of waste, but not a whole lot. I don't think everybody's got that. All animals like it, but
Everyone's needing those nutrients down here, not just the cattle.
That's right.
Yeah.
We use lick wheel tanks too, and we have very little waste.
Mm-hmm.
You see very little. What they drizzle around on the tank, they'll lick it off the tank too. And
Nothing. Yeah.
so, but after we went to the full-time 12 months out of the year when the product out, we don't have crowded tanks. You don't see cattle crowding around the tanks anymore. I don't have it.
And so before we go to questions online, could we talk a little bit about the forages that you're utilizing as you're utilizing this? So, you talked a little bit about the quality of the testing that you're doing on forages to think about the supplementation, formulation that you're using. But what forages are you grazing when you're typically on these products?
Predominantly, we have the grass, and of course, we have lots of smut grass infestation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of smut grass and the grass. We have a little Hermaphia, but most of it's the grass or about to be smut grass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're the same. We have some Hermaphia fields, but we try to keep our young cattle on them or our first calf heifers. What I've seen is as intake on your product goes up, forage quality is going down. So it's all relative. And then the same way in the spring, as your forage quality goes up, your intake goes down. But as far as smut grass, I mean, we had 5,000 acres of smut grass east of here in Fort Pearce. And that was probably one of our most productive places because we used cattle to harvest the smut grass. And the way you could do that was stimulate their rumen through molasses. And they would harvest it. And we never mowed it. We didn't mow it. We would mob graze it, and we had a lot of production increase because we kept it short. But it was because of the molasses. You use that in combination. But most of our pastures are Bahia grass and pretty poor quality.
We have a good bit of jigs grass. We still have some star grass. And what I've found is I can let that get big and rank, and with the molasses, those cattle go in there and they eat it. And then also we've got plenty of smut grass, and that's if it wasn't for the molasses, I don't think we'd get the gain and get the conception rates we get. And we got a good bit of Bahia grass, so we've got a mixture of just about everything.
Absolutely. So Lindsay, do we already have some questions online?
We do.
Okay, we'll switch to the online portion then.
Okay, so I made a couple notes while y'all were talking. Alex, you actually pointed this out to me a few years ago, and I just think it's a really neat thing to keep in mind. All of you kind of mentioned that you can put your molasses out maybe once a month or once every 3 weeks or something like that. But monitoring is still incredibly important, because if you leave the tanks open or without molasses, and I know that y'all know this, but for the participants, if they're left open for maybe a week each month, then that works out to 3 months a year that your cattle are without mineral, if that's your mineral program. And that's really important to keep in mind, especially, if you're using that mineral package, but then also if you're really relying on it for your protein and energy and you don't have a lot of forage. So monitoring is still going to be incredibly important, even if you're going to use that product. And then also, if it is your mineral package and possibly your fly control package, Heath actually pointed this out to me once before. It is your mineral package, and most people, or we've never seen it before, don't limit their cattle with lids, fences, or anything like that to get to the mineral box or the mineral house or whatever you have. So that's a really neat thing that you pointed out, that more cattle are able to utilize each tub in that scenario. So that's certainly very interesting.
We learned that through trial and error with putting our bred 2-year-olds back with mature cows and then studying them. And we found that when the mature cow herd went up to the lick tank or the open top tank, they all got their fill. But the young cattle followed the older cattle off and never did. The first year we separated them and fed them separately, conception jumped up 20% on the young cattle. But it's basically they were needing more nutrition and more mineral, and wasn't getting it because they were following the older cattle just pecking border.
Yeah, so observations at that trough are very interesting, and all of you have made really neat observations, I think, at your own troughs or tubs, whatever it is that you're using. I know a few of you have used the molasses as vehicles for other things. Some of you have mentioned for fly control, some of you have mentioned for mineral. What are your thoughts on using it as a vehicle to plant seed, like Ashenominy, for example?
We have done it, and it is successful. We've mixed Ashenominy seed, Bahia seed, and we went out and looked. You were with us, and you'd find it growing across the pasture. So it does work, and we, it really work in a good place, like a good native piece. We're trying to get some better quality forage there.
Yeah, I've done it too. He knows about it. We put and you can reduce your seeding density. You don't have to put as much seed out. You get waste when you spread seed. But typically Ashenominy, we had a pasture that we put it in the molasses tanks. I've got pictures that I didn't send you, but where you could see it come up on the wheel, and cattle would go in the manure. That's where you'd see it. And that's the last place they're going to eat is their manure. They're going to eat around it. So it's going to get a chance to come up. But the thing, the management is pulling cattle off of it and letting it establish, and then rotating cattle back around. But in what we do, any ground that we disturb, we put Ashenominy out because we're fertilizing less, and we're using that Ashenominy as a input on fertilizer rather than fertilizer. The one thing about, just to step back if I could, about the mineral you asked about, there's all the subclinical things that come when you don't have a good mineral program. And that's what you see, pink eye, foot rot, prolapse, retained placenta. So I'll watch on social media when a guy's out there, he's fixing a prolapse today, and I call him and say, hey, what's your mineral program? And then you got to think about it, because some of them aren't feeding mineral, or they're not feeding the right mineral, or they're letting their boxes go empty. But those things, the building blocks of the amino acids and the vitamins and the minerals, that's what causes those subclinical, the retained placentas and prolapses. I bought a set of cows 2 weeks ago, and the first 2 calves that they had retained placentas. I called the guy and I said, what kind of mineral program were you on? He goes, well, we weren't really feeding mineral. So that's all basic. And you can fix a lot of your problems about taking cattle to the pens or treating animals by having a secure, successful mineral program. But keeping it in the box or in the molasses is key, keeping it out. on the fly control, if you don't keep it out, it doesn't work because you don't break that life cycle. So,
Alan or Nikki, did y'all want to add anything?
No,
A couple questions from online. The first one is, do you think that feeding liquid molasses aids in getting additional years of production out of your cows? So maybe they're not using their teeth as much on the cubes, or maybe a cooked or extruded product, or maybe they're thinking additional years because you're feeding year round and so they have longevity. Do you feel like that's ever happened?
I think part of the question might be we getting additional years because we're maybe keeping them in the herd longer because they are getting bred, as Matt talked a little bit about, potential 5% conception. If we look at that 5% conception, that, there's potential more animals staying in the herd longer. So that may be one way that they, that question may be phrased.
Yeah, I mean, I would, just off the cuff, I would assume you're probably getting a little more longevity because you got a healthier animal.
yeah.
Now, I guess the flip side of that could be is that when we're feeding molasses, we're making them consume harsher forages. So then you get into the issue of teeth and all. We have some places at smut grass where cattle will wear out fast because their teeth are gone. But if we didn't have that molasses, they wouldn't have anything. They wouldn't be able to eat anything either.
Yeah.
So,
We have some 14, 15-year-olds that you won't know they are that old to look at. And they're still bringing a big calf to the pen every year. That's right.
Okay, good. They want to know from each of you, do you vaccinate once or twice per year?
So we vaccinate and then we'll go back and booster.
on the cows or calves?
They didn't ask that. Just, do you vaccinate once or twice a year?
We vaccinate, we do our herd health once a year, and then we do our pre-breeding vaccinations. So before breeding season, but we worm twice a year though. We
Okay.
drench one time and we also inject one time.
Okay. You just brought that up. So there is a product that has fenbendazole, which is the safeguard, active ingredient in safeguard, that adds that to the molasses also. Have any of you ever used that product?
We have, we worm, that's the only time we ever use an open top containers when we worm cows with our molasses. We added the safeguard in the molasses.
Okay.
Yeah, we figured we knew how many pounds each cow consumed, and we put the dosage in a tank, and we did that.
And I've done it in a confinement type situation where I've had a lot of heifers in a small area, and I've utilized it that way.
Yeah, the key to that is you have to superdose it. So they have to consume it over a 3 to 4 day period.
Yeah.
So there's some products that where you're only consuming 2.5 to 3 pounds a day. You can't put it in that because it's going to take them 3 weeks to consume it. So that's where open trough and really, a short
I think we went about
consumption
8% or something real,
Yeah.
something.
But we've done that and pulled fecal samples behind it and seen a reduction in egg counts.
Colleen, do you remember how to unmute people?
Click on them and do ask.
Okay, if anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself and you will be heard by the entire group and we will answer your question as it comes in. If you're having problems, just click on the chat feature either at the top or bottom of your screen.
I've got a quick question. So you all are fairly large producers, and what would you recommend for somebody that might be a smaller producer that might have 30 to 50 head and might be on leased land as far as storage or transportation? Would you have any suggestions for some of the smaller producers?
I deal with a lot of small producers that, prior to us providing bulk tanks for them, that would use a 250-gallon tote, and they'd go up to Walpole or one of the local feed dealers and put it in the back of their truck and gravity feed it right into a trough. It's a little labor, a little messy sometimes, but it's fairly easy to do. The flip side of that is if you wanted to tote a ton of mineral out there and put it in your boxes, 50 pounds out of whack. So I think the labor trade-off.
Some of these feed stores will rent you tanks and all and deliver to you.
Yeah. The calculations that I've run are if you have, I think it's 500 cows, then you can go buy molasses, put out wagon and storage. and pay for it in 2 years with the savings from buying in bulk. So if you have 30 cows, your value is you don't have to hire a guy or do it yourself to hire your local dealer, because it's figured in the cost, and have them deliver. And sometimes on our outside parcels, it's cheaper for them to deliver it than it is for somebody to take away from what they're doing and go put out one tank. So that's what I would say is outsource that and buy that from your local dealer that has all the infrastructure and all the storage.
Yeah, every dealer can deliver whatever you're needing, small or big.
Okay, we have another question from Eliana. Eliana, I'm going to ask you to unmute. You're fixing to get a request, so you can ask your question now. Okay. There's another. The gentleman with the, I'm so sorry to just call you out like this, but with the handlebar mustache, and you have your hand up and you have on reading glasses. I just asked you to unmute. You should be able to speak now. Nobody's.
Yeah, this is Chuck. I guess you were talking with me. My question there before was about if they had seen anything on additional longevity. We've been using it now for several years, year round, and I expected, or I was hoping to see more weaning weights than I did. Conception rates are way up, and the biggest thing that was a surprise is I've noticed that cows are just productive longer. They're living longer in a productive life, not becoming coal cows due to lack of productivity. I have got to, because we can do our body condition scores on those cattle, and I don't see the fluctuation that we used to see seasonally in the cattle. And I think it's just generally, in their general health is just better. And we've also not seen as many calving problems. It's been generally nutrition makes a better herd. And that was just, I wanted to see if the other people had maybe not tracked that yet, but had seen those type of results.
I would agree 100%.
Yeah. Everything you said.
Everything you said, we've seen, we do track it. And good nutrition is just going to make for a more productive cow.
There's some science behind that. So back, and I don't know all the history, but I've done research on it and looked at it. But during, what was it, the Irish potato famine, they tested women that were pregnant in their first, second, and third trimester. And it's fetal programming. And then they followed those kids along through their life. And there was a higher instance of cancer, heart problems, diabetes, all the other things. And what the gentleman said was right. You see those subclinical, you don't see those subclinical problems because their nutrition is balanced. I mean, it's the same way in cattle. There was some drought work done in Texas where heifers were kept during a drought, and they were less productive because their building blocks of their amino acids and their basic were they were shorted, because of the drought. So they lived a shorter lifespan.
Yeah, we several years back, before I'd ever heard of fetal programming, we had the data on folks that were feeding year-round programs, and we noticed that something was going on in their replacement heifers, and the first time they'd breed, the breed backs as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and they were significantly higher than the folks that wasn't feeding, were on seasonal feeding. So, I think it was fetal programming that was showing up, and that was what we were trying to identify at those times. So, yeah, I would agree.
Thank you, Chuck, for that question. Does anyone else have any questions for the panelists? I don't see any hands raised or any other chats coming in. Okay, I think that's everyone. Okay, K and C McDonald. Hold on just 1 second. I will unmute you. Okay, the McDonald group should be able to talk now.
Good evening. I was just wondering what kind of pregnancy rate differences you were seeing versus like just a seasonal molasses or a year-round, like what % difference you guys were seeing.
Let me tackle it first.
Sure.
So, if you go from some of our co-op members that have no program, not doing anything as far as supplement, the compared to seasonal and year-round feeding, the conception rates could be as much as 20% lower in those folks that aren't feeding anything. When you compare seasonal to year-round, very narrow. The seasonal feeders, you know, they're 2 to 3% lower than the year-round feeders. So then you have to, you know, we start looking at the economics, what's going on there, and it was a little concerning for me because I've been touting year-round feeding for many years, and then the last time that I run the numbers and I seen the seasonal feeders were their conception rates were just as high within 2 or 3 points as a year-round feeder. I got a little concerned of what I was preaching, but then when I started running all the numbers, you know, and looking at a 10-year historical pattern, I found that your rainfall averages and conception rates would typically follow those patterns. If you had high rainfall, you may have lower conception, vice versa. But when I noticed that the folks that were feeding year-round, they stayed flat. They didn't gain and they didn't lose, where the seasonal folks would drop 10 points. So when I spoke about year-round versus seasonal, you look at the economics of it, you know, on a 1-year time period, you'd say, well, I want to go with seasonal because conception rates are just as high, but weaning weights are a little lower. But if you get in a bad situation, typically the year-round feeder's going to pull through with no issues, where the seasonal guy's going to suffer a little.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And my numbers show, it's like Alex said, it's a narrow gap between the season and the year-round. I mean, the first numbers that I look at are 88% conception rate. The year prior to the year-round, first year-round we did, and 92 on breed up after a year-round. And then I can go back to 20 years ago where it's the same numbers now. It's documented that, you know, you're 20% less not supplemented. You know, that's you go back to the non-supplementation and just conversation. A veterinarian told me one time, he said, you'll go back to the old Mother Nature rule of a third, a third, and a third. And a third of your cows will get bred early, a third of your cows will get bred late, and a third of them will be open. And that goes back to that 68%. And then your open cows, if you keep them, you know, and a lot of people do, they'll get bred early, and then your cycle rolls around. But that's because, just like Alex said, it's based on rainfall and your nutrition in the grass. And year in and year out, it's different, but not all cattle are going to respond with no supplementation. It's going to be poor doing.
I brought a report from May the 1st where we pre-exect all the mature cows, and it's almost 92%. In this group we checked were 174 mature cows, and I think there were 14 opens in it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it's got to do with forage quality too. So I'll step back and go to our property in Georgia, and it's totally different because the input costs are higher. We feed 1 bale of hay per head per month, you know, depending on the winter season. We plant some winter forages, but we'll run 96% conception in Georgia, and I can't do that down here on a year-round program. It's just totally different with the weather, with the water, cattle standing water and mosquitoes now. But up there, you know, we're running 1 cow to 1 acre. Just the inputs are different. And it's that way around the country. People have higher inputs, but they get more production. I mean, this part of the world is just tough to ranch.
Okay, we got one additional question. I guess I can answer that. Are you adding your own mineral and fly control in-house, or is it added at the mill? The mill adds mineral and the IGR fly control, and safeguard Fenbendazole if you want that added. And if you want to add ashnominy or Bahia grass seed, you're going to have to do that at the house, because they will not do that in Cluist or at the Purina mill either. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I don't see any more hands. K&C McDonald, are y'all still, okay, you took your hand down. Well, it says, without turning it into a sales meeting, I see, Terry, would you like to add anything? Terry Weaver, you're on the call. Hang on just 1 second. You want to talk? Oh, you got it.
Sure, Lindsay. In a general note, these guys have done a great job of hitting some major high points. I'd probably, if I had to emphasize anything, is from our data, August is a critical time in Florida. We talk about Florida being different, Matt, than some of those other areas, and what makes it really, really different is the amount of fiber that's in our forage. It makes our forage tough to survive our climate. It's something that's an animal has to have a good rumen to digest that. And so in August, in the grand growth period, the protein in our forages in Florida drops off dramatically, and to the point of it's the same as what our forages would be during the winter. And we just got 30 years of data that shows that. And so those animals are heavy bred. Protein at that point in the life cycle of that cow is extra important to consider when you're looking at fetal programming. Matt, you talked about when that calf is inside that mama, you wean that calf off, but you don't realize there's a calf still inside of her, and we kind of forget her for 2 or 3 months. And that's the leverage point that we've missed for years and years and years. And that's the leverage point where we're seeing these productivity advantages. It's in that August, September, October, and that's gonna make or break you. And that's the difference on year-round versus seasonal program.
Lindsay, there's one thing that there are several things, but there's one thing important tonight that Terry and I will agree on, even though we're on different sides of the fence, is that liquid molasses is important to the Florida cow herd. And I said it beforehand, you can't do it economically, Chris, with cubes or DDGs or with citrus pulp. I mean, the molasses-based nutritional program is the most economical way to go. And I think Terry would agree with me on that. We've had this.
Yeah, if you think about it, Matt, you hit that perfectly. The sugars in molasses is just the juice out of a tropical grass. And so it's not much different, but just in a concentrated form that you're putting back in that cow. And so you're feeding those rumen microflora so she can digest the grass. We got a lot of grass with a lot of fiber and not a lot of guts. And so liquid feed is all the guts from the molasses. That's really the guts of a forage that we harvested down in the Everglades. And so that's why it works so well down here. It probably works better in these subtropical climates than it does anywhere else in the country. And so that's just kind of give you a little different perspective of why molasses works so good in this kind of a situation as opposed to DDGs or some of those other energy sources.
Thank you, Terry, for that input. Westway and Purina and Quality Liquid Feeds have been really excellent sponsors of this program in the past when we've had expenses to be paid. So we certainly appreciate y'all participating in this meeting. There was a question a minute ago on here that asked about, she only has a few head. Can she just use salt blocks as her mineral? And the answer to that is no. You should not do that. And salt is used in the molasses, liquid molasses, as a limiter and also to meet their nutritional requirements for sodium chloride. But the block should be limited for those pastures where you have maybe it's hard for you to get to, or maybe you have a situation where you can't get to those pastures for whatever reason. But most mineral is going to have a 3 to 4 ounce per head per day requirement. And the only opportunity that they have to get that in their mouth is with their tongue. And I know that you've probably licked or tasted the mineral when you put it out, licked the salt block when you put it out. And I'm not the only one in this room that's done that. Everybody's laughing. Okay, there's some people not laughing. We've all licked it. So even my 2-year-old is in on this. So it's difficult to, 3 to 4 ounces is 1 serving of beef. So it's challenging to get the entire amount that they need by licking that block. I would highly recommend that if that was your only opportunity to get mineral into your animals, then you use a trace mineral block that is a complete package. And even then still consider using a loose mineral, which is designed for rumens to utilize. Does anyone else want to say anything about using salt? You can. Matt Pearce, you just smiled. Okay, so you can use salt, loose salt, as a way to cut your consumption down, especially during the summer. You're going to notice that your mineral consumption is going to increase, maybe even double what they actually need for those months. But you can use stock salt to cut that trace mineral bag if you're not using liquid mineral package. You can use your salt to use it as a limiter and get your 3 to 4 ounces per head per day for your loose mineral if you need to. But don't put them on separate sides of the mineral house. Thank you for the smile, Matt Pearce. Okay, what are your thoughts on increasing stocking rates with year-round product and grazing Hermothria grass that grows more tons per acre than Bahia grass but lacks the nutrition?
That's the question.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on increasing stocking rates with year-round product? So you can increase your stocking rates using the product year-round, and grazing Hermothria that grows more tons per acre than Bahia grass but lacks the nutrition. So can you stock it heavier?
Yes. Would you agree?
Yeah. What you're doing with the liquid supplementation is you're extending your forage. Yeah. If you just had them on forage, then that's all they're going to get. But when you supplement with the molasses product, you're going to extend that forage, so you could increase your stocking density.
Okay, is it possible to add fly control or mineral on your own if you want to, in case you don't get it from the molasses dealer and instead you get your molasses from a different source? That's actually a good question, because sometimes you get it from the feed
Well, here's
store.
the issue is settling. When you get molasses nowadays from some of the reputable dealers, it's blended, stays in suspension. The days of old, when we used to mix it in there, black strap with mineral bags, all the black strap be gone, the mineral be still sitting at the bottom of the tank. So I'm not saying you can't do it. I wouldn't recommend you don't do it. It's just going to settle out on you, and you're not going to get proper consumption.
You can also get fly control in dry mineral too, like
Yes.
the wind and rain that we.
Yeah, dry mineral also has fly control.
Okay, and then the end of that question is, how do they add the wormer they talked about? Do they mix it themselves? That is definitely something to be done at the mill, because it needs to be eaten at 3 to 4 ounces. I'm sorry, that would be if it was a dry mineral, but even in the liquid molasses, there's a certain consumption rate that you're going to need to consume in order to control the parasites. So there's no instruction or label for that at home on the back of your Fenbendazole bottle. So I would just be really careful with that.
You can do it, but your efficacy goes down because they do need to consume it in a 3 to 4 day period to have it effective.
So, Patty, the answer is you need to check with your molasses guy.
A lot of us have done it.
Yeah.
And it works, but it's not going to work near as good as somebody that blended it in a mill that has everything blended correctly.
Yeah, because I mean, the trouble is how do you the way Purina mixes their product is homogenization, so it stays together. It's not like the vinegar and oil and a salad dressing that's in 2 layers and you shake it up. On agitation, it goes back together. It stays together in one form. And so if you mix it yourself, you're going to get a string of white, kind of like cappuccino or whatever, where they make the hearts. But that's not what you want, because the first cow is going to get more than the second cow than the third cow. So yeah, it goes back to efficacy. You can, but your efficacy goes down.
Perfect. Okay, so this isn't a touch screen. How many head do you consider one lip tank able to service?
Standard, what I figure is 1 cow or 25 cows per wheel. So you got 100 cows to a lip wheel, to a 4-wheel tank. That's what we do. But there again, it goes to grazing distribution. So if you got 100 cows in there, that doesn't mean you just have 1 tank. If you want to disperse your grazing, you could put 3 tanks and scatter your cattle out. Just depends, I guess.
Matt, what do you consider for in terms of storage life, product that's in bulk storage?
6 months. Your fat products, as long as they stay in suspension, they won't fall out. And what happens is you go through heat during the summer, and if they do settle, then you have issues there. But as long as they stay in suspension, it's good. Mm-hmm. Very seldom you come by any rancid, anybody's product. You don't see any rancid.
I have gotten, several questions, and I've observed it that, when you stick some molasses out there and then you get a 4-inch rain, and people think that, that's why we need a top on it. Well, the cows will, and you'll see the fat floating, but the cows will come down and suck the water off of it. Mm-hmm. But I've had folks that actually would dump the tank because they thought it was bad because there was 4 inches of water standing on it.
Yeah.
But no, the cows will suck that water off the top to get the molasses.
Most molasses is 35% moisture anyway.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I was thinking of it in terms of Aaron's question here on some of these smaller producers that when they start thinking about bulk, and then we've got to get that product used up.
Yeah.
No, I think the life of it is, you've got plenty of time to use it. It's a pretty stable product.
Okay, I think that was the last question. I do want to remind everyone, since the dewormer in the molasses came up, Terry pointed out the label is the law on all pesticides. So if there's no instruction on your dewormer that you can use it in that way, it's highly recommended that if you don't want to break the law and do anything erroneous to the food supply, follow the label. So I want to thank each one of y'all for being here. Thank you, Alex, Matt, Alan, and Nikki Smith. I appreciate all of you being here. Chris Prevatt, you did an amazing job moderating and incorporating your economics into this seminar. This is a recorded seminar, so if any of you would like the link, I can send it to you tomorrow. I have all of your email addresses, and thank you all so much for joining. I hope that this was beneficial for everyone. We did just get one more question. I'm so sorry. It says, if you get molasses from a mill and not the dealer, should we test it to see what kind of nutrition is in it? Can they eat too much? So the mill and the feed store or the dealer is going to have a guaranteed analysis on your product. I can't imagine any situation where you would be buying the molasses when it wouldn't come with a guaranteed analysis.
Maybe if you're buying a byproduct like citrus residue or something, they don't really put the product.
Yeah, if you're getting citrus molasses, you might want to be cautious of it.
So, Patty, if you ever need your molasses tested, your University of Florida livestock extension agent can assist you with collecting that and sending it off for you and getting you an amazing guaranteed analysis for your product that you can use perfectly to supplement your herd. So with that, I'm going to push end and thank y'all so much for joining us.